Welcome to this meeting of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs. It's a pleasure to have you all back with us. And today we're resuming our long-running series of events on culture, conflict, and recovery in Asia, a series that we have been running since December last year in collaboration with Aleph Strategies. Today we welcome Moe Chiba from UNESCO, chairing a panel of people who have worked very hard on crisis response, and particularly in the use of cultural instruments in that context. And they are Amitava Bhattacharya, Usdianto, and Arti Jaiman. I will leave further detailed introductions to the panelists to Moe, to whom I'll hand over in a moment. We also have online Daniel Skillings from Aleph Strategies, who will be involved in the discussion at the end. And as usual, our panel will welcome questions from the audience. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A channel, the button you will find at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to make sure that your questions get answered. I'll return at the end of this event with a few announcements about forthcoming activities, but until then, I'll simply hand over to Moe. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to the session on Building on Culture from Ambon to Delhi via Kolkata. Although there are no dedicated sustainable development goals on culture, there is a growing acceptance that it is an indispensable transversal element for all the sustainable development goals, be it livelihood, social inclusions, or quality of education. But in this session, let us look specifically its role in conflict mitigation, resolution, and recovery. In the post-conflict or disaster situation, it's very common for the NGOs to call upon arts and culture projects for reconciliation or rehabilitation. As the UN Culture Organization, UNESCO too has advocated the importance of culture projects for community solidarity and identity building. And yet, culture is one of the least funded projects. The governments and donors rarely consider it essential. They often look upon the cultural project with a bit of disdain, calling them charity events. These are the terms they use, meaning nice little things but not important enough to invest in a critical situation such as post-conflict or disaster. However, our question is it really the case? Fortunately, the voices from the field seem to suggest something different. And this is what we would like to discuss with my friends Amitava and Arti from India and Benny from Indonesia. None of them actually work on culture promotion per se. They work on rural livelihood, community radio, or emergency response in a problematic context of poverty or communal tension. And yet, culture is an essential part of their strategies. So, through this panel discussion this morning, I wish to ask them why they have chosen the cultural approach. Why it had to be culture? Because there seemed to be something only culture could do or is the most effective. Now, I would like to call on our first friend Benny from Indonesia. Benny, is your video on? Great.
Yes.
Benny, you have worked in many post-conflict and disaster situations. We know that basic needs and infrastructure development are the government priorities. However, arts and culture activities are often deployed for the reconciliation process. Could you share your experience and why using arts and culture is so essential in the reconciliation process? What is your experience from Indonesia? So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mo. Let me put my presentation on the screen, please. Okay. Yeah. Can you see my presentation there, the PowerPoint? Good. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you are all well, and greeting from Yogyakarta. First of all, I'd like to thank UNESCO for this opportunity to share with you one experience of how a local wisdom in the community of Maluku, Indonesia, which evidently has played an important role to stop violence and reconcile the conflicting communities that took place about 2 decades ago. Yes, let me see. Hold on. I try to. Excuse me. I try to. Okay, it doesn't matter. I would like to continue with this. Before we get to the issue, I'd like to start by showing the places we are discussing now. These are a map of Indonesia, and the inset shows the North Maluku province and Maluku province. And this is Ambon Island, the place of our focus of discussion. And this is Buru Island and Seram Islands, which historically were the origins of the Alifura indigenous people. The Alifura people traveled to the other islands, to this island here, and settled there. So the indigenous people of Maluku and North Maluku came from the same descendants, Alifura people. Aside from the natural beauty of Maluku, Maluku actually has been famous of spices like nutmeg and cloves that since centuries ago, these spices attracted traders from the Middle East who then brought Islam to Maluku, but also from Europe, the Portuguese and the Dutch traders who also came for the spices and brought Christianity. And later the Dutch stays there, colonized Maluku, and introduced a system of small rulers in the villages. It's called Raja Negeri or Latupati. And then people from South and Southeast Sulawesi, which is here, migrated and also settled in Maluku after sometimes the growing number of the Islam and the Christian followers in Maluku apparently experienced several conflicts among themselves due to the different religions or other matters. And this really concerned the Rajas and the Negris, who then decided to make an agreement which called Pela Gandong. Pela means a tie or an agreement, and Gandong means the same descendant. So Pela Gandong is an agreement between the same lineage. And Pela Gandong was very relied by the community to prevent or to solve when problem or fights arise, or to help each other when they experience natural disaster or they were in need of food. When they construct public facilities, Pela Gandong is very useful to organize these people. And actually, if we look after the process in the history, from the 1967, Indonesia was ruled by the New Order government for over 3 decades. One of the many things that the New Order did was introducing the village government system that was adopted from the Javanese system. This village government system applied a top-down approach from the central government to the individual citizen, apparently. And the system is contrary to the existing local wisdom, of course, since this is top-down. Later, many interests from outside Maluku, like exploiting the natural resources, slowly eroded the local wisdom of Pela Gandong, unfortunately. Um, there were several aspects identified in many researches I read. For example, like transmigration program from the government, which ignore enculturization. The people exercise religious seriously, but not really into spiritually. Research also indicates that the characteristic of the Maluku people, honest, reactive, but it's also emotional. So these all findings that indicates about unequal economic as well. And basically the village system give the benefits to certain people who are close to the government, and that also added to the problem in Maluku. I think it's also necessary to remember that the time before a conflict in Maluku occurred there, in 1990s, the monetary crisis in Indonesia led to a major demonstration initiated by students, happened in Jakarta and many other cities and big towns, which turned into violence involving security apparatus. And unfortunately, in Jakarta itself, violence also experienced by the Chinese ethnics that turned into a tragic situation. All of these events led to the step down of the president, and that the activists at the time claimed to start the reformation era in Indonesia, aiming to the implementation of a better democratic system of governance. Yes, and back in Maluku, in that very hot time of political changes in Ambon Island, there was a normal fight actually of two young men in a market, and it happened on the 19 January 1999, which then just in days, the fight was heard by others in different corners of the town and turned into large fight of groups in different places with religious, unfortunately, religious nuances of Christian groups against Muslim groups will arise. And in months, the conflict escalated and spread to the other islands, and not only in Maluku, but it's also going up to the North Maluku Islands. And the fight got worse when the security apparatus involved and took sides in its group, and that weapons and guns were around and unfortunately utilized. It became really serious when then the external actors like the jihadists from other islands, it's called Laskar Jihad, participated in the conflict. This then concerned the religious leaders, the locals, and nationally as well, and the elites to initiate meetings, and they made an agreement which is called Malino II. And Malino II actually are replications of a similar effort to stop similar communal conflict that also occurred in Poso in Central Sulawesi, which also happening at the same time. In fact, at that time, there were a number of conflict happening in different places in Indonesia. It was quite a difficult time. Yes, and as predictable that the such conflict in Maluku and North Maluku inevitably claimed thousands of lives and displacement, loss of people assets, massive destructions from burning houses, public facilities, village boundaries closed, people were segregated, cultural order dysfunction, and access to humanitarian reliefs cut off completely. There was perception in both conflicting groups as well that there was strong mutual distrust. There was also exploitation and politicization of religions coming from the centrals, and information distortion and provocations by the unknown spread around, not from the locals, apparently. And sadly, that the people in general felt that they were left alone by the government to solve their own problems, because the government at the time was overwhelmed by so many conflicts that occur in many different places. And amidst the conflict, there were, of course, different initiatives coming to try to stop violence, the conflict, and to stop the conflict and also to start the reconciliation. But some were not from genuine will. In fact, there was some personal interests playing. People tried to take the benefits from the conflict, apparently. And later in April, a local NGO, it was Hualopu, approached a lecturer or practitioner. His name is Iksan Malik, who was based in Jakarta, to discuss about holding a training to discuss about threat and opportunity of conflict. This is based on the book that Iksan Malik wrote. Iksan then, from this discussion, visited different humanitarian organizations, meeting academicians, religious leaders from both the Muslims and the Christians in Ambon Island, and also to the other islands. And they discuss about possibility to find ways for conflict resolution. This initial meeting were actually the beginning of the movement of Pakubai, a grassroots initiative. And Pakubai itself more or less means to be kind to one another. And about 2 months later, Iksan visited the Laskar Jihad, who were based in Yogyakarta. Again, Laskar Jihad was one of the strong actors in the Maluku conflict. And the talk also touched base about conflict resolution. He said that it was a very important meeting because of the roles of Laskar Jihad there. And in his book, sorry?
Benny, you have 1 more minute to finish.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mo, for reminding. Yes, apparently it was then followed by a number of meetings that was conducted to try to gather the interest of the people to back up the Pakubai movement. And let me show the, I think this is a good thing that we need to go. Yes, after several months of Pakubai movement meeting with different groups, and they continued with the roadshow and press conference and meetings with the president, the parliament, but conflicts still continued. And in April, there's a meeting with the European Parliament, and it was then going on with a meeting at the having a dialogues with different community representatives involving, those affected by the conflict. And in that meeting, actually, there's the Pelagandong and the Raja reappeared for the cohesive lineage, to build a cohesive lineage. And then it was then followed by other, a series of activities, a meeting with the governor, a military commander, religious leaders, aiming to stop the violence and to rearrange for the future of the Maluku. That's more or less what the Pelagandong is, that it could help in try to reconcile the people and to start violence in the in Maluku. Sorry if it took a while. Thank you. Over to you, Mo.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Benny, one thing you have not mentioned is that Ambon is also known as a place of the music.
Yes.
And it has very strong musical traditions. And of late, the government, in order to improve the image of the conflict to a peaceful place, they're putting a lot of emphasis on on promoting their cultural tradition, musical traditions, and actually Ambon has recently become the UNESCO Creative Cities of the music. So do you think
That's
actually the
interesting.
musical tradition actually was so one of the important component in reconciling the populations, a uniting factor to reconcile populations from the Muslim and the Christian communities? Do you have any insights on that?
I think that's really true, that because it's music is basically instrumental in the community to get together, and there's a sharing of feelings in the music, and that is I would say that it yeah, it wasn't, I mean, I didn't explore that, but it was one of the activities after the Bakubai that people try to reactivate, to try to use different sort of activities, like going back to the market, having this musical concert, you know, school reactivated and things like that. That was some of the instruments that helps the reconciliation in the communities.
Yeah, because somewhere I got an impression that music was a neutral ground, you know, when there is a fight between the religion, and that's something that keeps going for centuries, for which we really haven't got any solutions, you know. Maybe the music actually offer this neutral ground between the Christians and the Muslims. Okay, thank you very much, Benny.
Thank you, Mo. Yes.
And now I'd like to call on Arti, my friend from India. Arti, you manage a very vibrant community radio in Gurgaon, in the outskirts of Delhi, known for many migrant communities, well, who don't sit well together. There's always this subtle tensions amongst the migrant communities. And there you develop a series of radio programs to create a new bond amongst the diverse groups and understand that culture was an important tool for you.
Absolutely.
Please, could you tell us more about this program and why you have chosen these cultural components, you know, as a way to create a new bond among the migrant communities? Now, floor is yours.
Thank you, Moe. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we are all existing in different times and different spaces at this moment. And I hope somewhere music can unite us all. As Mohi has already introduced, I'm Arti, and I'm the station director of Gurgaon Ki Awaaz, which is a community radio. I would like to thank the Royal Society for Asian Affairs for holding this webinar. And I would especially like to thank Moe Chiba for bringing all of us onto this single platform. So today I will be talking about how we at our community radio station, Gurgaon Ki Awaaz Samudayak Radio, use folk music to build bridges within our community. We have been on air for 13 years, but before I go a little further, I would like to share a very small audio clip, which is basically 3 samples of music that we play on our radio. So total is only about 45 seconds. So I would just like to share my screen before I kind of go further. Yeah. ये हादसों का शहर है हमारे गाँव, ये हादसों का शहर है हमारे गाँव, चलो यहाँ पे यहाँ पे यहाँ पे जान का डर है हमारे गाँव, चलो Yeah, so that would give you an idea of, you know, how we sound, or rather, how does music sound on Gurgaon Ki Awaaz? So let me share a little bit of a background. As Gurgaon, which is now called Gurugram, started urbanizing in the late 1980s and 90s, a huge influx of migrant workers from across India, but especially the relatively poor states of Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh, came to the small town to work in the construction companies and manufacturing factories, turning Gurgaon into a fashionable suburb of Delhi. These workers needed homes to stay in, and in the absence of any provision of low-cost rentals by the government, local villagers stepped into this gap and provided housing for migrant workers by building tenements over and around their land and houses in what are now urban villages of Gurgaon. As thousands and thousands of migrants moved into these villages, there was a sharp swing in the ratio of local to migrant. In a village, for example, of predominantly local Haryanvis, now almost 80 to 90% of the population consists of migrant workers. So if there's a village of 100,000 residents, only 10,000 are locals and 90,000 are migrant workers and their families. Despite earning most of their income from rentals from migrants, the power lies mostly with local landlords who, on a whim, can ask a migrant to leave their rooms without any reason. With both sides having some ground for grievance, real or imagined, a lot of the disgruntlement and friction is because the two sides did not have any space for conversing as human beings, for listening to each other, to learn to appreciate the language and culture of the other community. There was no local media that gave that space, and there was no real shared space where locals and migrants could have a conversation while also respecting each other. For Gurgaon Ki Awaaz, when it was set up in 2009, the big challenge was how to bring these different members of the community, both local and migrant, onto a single platform to speak and to listen. With very few functioning community radio stations in 2009, to whom we could look to for ideas, we decided to take something that binds us all, rhythm and rhyme, music and meter, and see if that could create a space for conversation. From inception, Gurgaon Ki Awaaz decided to only broadcast folk music and not the Bollywood or Hindi music that was playing on other commercial FM channels. The aim was to record or source music from the languages that belonged to our listening community. So while the local community had a large and rich musical tradition in Haryanvi, which is a dialect of Hindi, the migrant community spoke languages like Bhojpuri and Maithili in Bihar, Rajasthani from Rajasthan, Bundeli from Madhya Pradesh, and Garhwali and Kumauni from Uttarakhand, which is a hill state. We issued open invitations to singers and musical groups. The musical groups are called mandalis, to come to our studio to record their music. Our first recordings were of Haryanvi music because that was the easiest to access and to reach out to. And the community has a tradition of all day and all night performances of a folk form called Raginis to celebrate special events. So if a child is born, they'll have an all-night Ragini performance. That, of course, led to more Haryanvi music coming our way, till a musician from Bihar called in and asked if he too could bring his group. When the first Bhojpuri songs, these are songs from Bihar, hit the airwaves, our phone line started buzzing with angry local Haryanvis demanding that we take off Bihari music from the air. What followed were long and patient conversations with callers to explain that a radio station with a name that read Voice of Gurgaon, which is what Gurgaon Ki Awaaz translates into, would very much try to have the voices of all the various communities that lived and worked in Gurgaon, regardless of their language. And we always ended up with that statement that the radio station would in fact endeavor to add more and more languages to the music pool. As time went by, more and more mandalis came into the studio to record. Many singers sent their already recorded CDs to the radio station with permission to broadcast. We also started creating fresh programs where music was grouped together thematically rather than according to language. So there would be a program on songs that were grouped on separation and longing, another program on wedding songs, another one on songs sung when a baby is about to be born or after a baby is born. The purpose was to highlight that music is a common thread that ties all human beings, who all live through the same life cycle, regardless of where they come from, which language they speak, or which religion they profess. With phone lines open after many of these programs, listeners started calling in, expressing their amazement that the songs that they grew up with had parallels in another language, in another community. Listeners started requesting songs in a language other than their own. So they started dedicating the songs to other listeners. A Haryanvi listener would request a song in Garhwali and dedicate it to the regular Garhwali listeners whom he had become friends with. and whom he had become friends with on radio. Listeners started leaving their phone numbers with the radio station, asking that it be shared with their new radio friends. And soon, listeners were regularly talking to each other outside of the radio station. They were meeting up at the shop of one of the local listeners who could not move around because he has a physical disability. They started making plans to celebrate festivals at the radio station, at our studio, plans that were shared with the radio station as a fait accompli. We were told that a group of listeners would come to the station to celebrate the festival of Eid, for example. When the group came to the studio with their arms loaded with food and drink, it was not just Muslims who had come, but also our Hindu listeners. Together, they had made a plan to celebrate Eid at the radio station with their radio family, because most Muslim migrant workers could not celebrate Eid with their families who were back in their villages in their home state. On Gurgaon Ki Awaaz, folk music has allowed for the disruption of the stereotypical power equation between local and migrant. In those moments when listeners are listening to the music of another community, the stereotypes inside their head are parked for a moment, allowing for another relationship to blossom, a relationship where people listen to and learn to respect another's culture. Our other approach to creating conversations that build solidarity in our community is with partnerships with archival and research organizations like Archive and Resource Center for Ethnomusicology of the American Institute for Indian Studies in Gurgaon. A series that embodies our approach is a series called Sara Asman Hamara, which translates into The Sky is Ours Too, which uses the thread of migration to talk about culture. One of the seasons of this series is built around the theme of the sacred secular. India is a home to many devotional music traditions. The sacred secular are genres of music where texts were often written by saint poets of the medieval age, defined as the Bhakti movement, which also saw the rise of Sufi traditions. What these share is the underlying concept of humanity, universal love and brotherhood, and stand for rising above the divisiveness of narrow religious beliefs. The collections that we tapped into from the archives of ARCE are those of poets like Kabir, Meera, Nirgun Bhajans, music of the Bauls and Fakirs of Bengal, Qawwali, the Sufi repertoire of Rajasthan, Kafi and Aradhi of Kutch, Sufi Qissas of Punjab, etc. Keeping the audience of Gurgaon Ki Awaaz in mind, we restricted ourselves to roughly the northern states of India, but including a range of languages. Small samples of up to 3 in each program were played, contextualizing and explaining the text and speaking about the music and musicians where possible. The programs are broadcast live with phone lines open to encourage a conversation with the listeners of Gurgaon Ki Awaaz. This set of programs, which was supported by UNESCO New Delhi, by the way, was an opportunity to open up an on-air conversation with our listeners about the everydayness and pervasiveness of the Sufi and Bhakti traditions in our lives, from the time we are children and begin to learn language. Listeners were calling in about how the sayings of Kabir and Rahim were idiomatically in their everyday language. They were talking about how they grew up learning the dohas or the couplets of Bhakti and Sufi poets in school, or internalizing the motifs of the warp and weft of diversity that make up our communities, as articulated by the poet Kabir, or the unbroken thread of friendship, which is never the same once it is broken, as beautifully written by Rahim. Music can break through stereotypes, can overcome distrust and dislike. It can create a space for conversation where there is none. Even if the language is unknown, a song has the capacity to convey emotion. And it is this emotion that human beings plug into and that allows them to connect to another person's life. The 16 hours of folk music that plays every day on Gurgaon Ki Awaaz has created the superstructure within which all the other conversations happen. The music has defined our listening community as one that is not bound by language or region. It has enabled people from different linguistic backgrounds to come together on a single platform. And it has created a space for respectful, serious, humorous conversations between listeners, a space where people can connect to other people, to overcome their loneliness, to be heard, to be seen. This space became all the more precious during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when people were locked into their homes in India, were locked in with their fears of lost jobs, hungry families, and a desperation to return to the security of their villages. It was the connections built using music over the previous 10 years that allowed us to immediately create spaces in programming for people to call in just to talk, to connect with another human being, to collectively share their pain and fears, and then collectively work towards alleviating each other's suffering. It seems like a stretch that music could bring us to this point, but it did. It brought us together, and it kept us together when it mattered most. Thanks, Moe.
Thank you, Arti. Um, I was stuck when you say that I fully agree that when you say that the source of tension is that when there's no space for conversing as a human being, and that somehow you manage to build that space to converse as a human being through music. But at the same time, it wasn't an easy journey. When you broadcasted the Bihari music in the first instance, you got angry calls from the Harihari populations.
Yeah.
So how long did it take for you to actually grow that communal kind of atmosphere finally in the radio station?
I think in many ways it's still a work in progress, but I think it took about a year or two. It really needed for us to have a large enough bank of music, which was growing organically. It's not as if we could start from day one with diversity in music, because one group would come in, and then one, say, percussion player within that was from some other community, and he would bring another group from another language. And we were constantly broadcasting on radio saying that if you have a music group, or you're a solo singer, you're a bathroom singer in any language, please come to the radio station. There are open doors. We don't even audition. And I think that helped a lot. But it took a year. I think it took a year or two for us to have enough music for the diversity to really be visible or to be audible.
Right. Thank you very much, Arti. It's always amazing to listen to your experience.
Thank you.
Now, however, I wish to call upon another friend from India, Amitava. Would you be online, please, Amitava? Yeah,
Sure.
you are. Here you
Am
are.
I
Hi.
audible enough?
Hi, Balawachi. Well, Amitava, you lead one of the most influential NGOs to my book on rural livelihood using traditional art. You work in poverty-ridden areas with inherent social discrimination and communal tensions, and you chose culture-based approach to address that poverty and social discrimination. And I want to know why you have chosen culture. It could have been anything else, right? But you have chosen culture to address those issues. So please do share your insight. Floor
Thanks,
is
Moe.
yours.
Thanks, Royal Society for Asian Affairs, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Yes, culture actually is a very powerful tool. By the way, I mean, I am not a cultural practitioner. I am an engineer from IIT Kharagpur and a Gurukul scholar in leadership and excellence from London School of Economics. Worked for first 10 years in software, left Silicon Valley in '99 and came back to Kolkata, to India, and then onwards last 22 years in culture and development. So why did I pick up culture? There must be some element in it. And let's see what does that, where it leads to. I will start with a small video. It's about 2 minutes, 46 seconds. Let me see whether that answers some bit of Moe's question and whether from there we can take it.
High potential rural artist communities have not developed the business tools to engage markets, resulting in slow death of their unique art forms. Banglanatak.com's Art for Life program, proven in West Bengal, transforms artist communities into thriving micro-enterprises impacting artists, art form, and discipline. Six art form transformations have had 100% success, doubling artists, primarily impacting and empowering women, increasing income 2.5 times, and reducing migrations. Low-income art forms shrunk from 38% to 15%, while high income grew from nothing to 26%. More than 90% of artists now have a bank account. More than half have a new or renovated house. 77% of these with sanitation and 100% electrified. Almost every artist is formally trained on the art form. 30% are digitally aware, and 38% of the next generation are now proud of and involved in the art form. The village is now a hub for international workshops and collaborations, and 6 art forms have geographical indication status. Tourism is now an integral part of the program. Rajasthan will expand tourism.
Now, I think this might answer Moe's question, why culture? Culture is a skill. You know, in engineering, MBA, medical, graduation, whatever, we consider these as skills through the urban educated eyes. But we never try to see what is there outside us. So it's very important. If we have to address poverty alleviation, if we have to address marginalization, if we have to address women empowerment, all the SDGs, it is very important to see life from their eyes. And that's exactly what I did 22 years back. See, in IIT, which happens to be the most premium institute in the world, they taught us a very important thing. If the process is good, product will be good. If the product goes bad, don't blame the product. Check the process. There is another very important element. They said, before you do anything, do a work study. In LSE, another very important element was taught. The research is not about what, the research is about why. Third important element I learned at Silicon Valley is that innovation is business. Now, if I add these 3 elements, if we have to address the global poverty, and India is a very good space because it has all the resources, it has produced the highest number of IT professionals, it has produced the top 20 richest person, at the same time, it still has poverty. So what causes poverty? My observation was that the villages which had agriculture or the villages which had industry were not poor. They were quite good. So that means villages which had neither of the both actually were poor. And every day it goes down for further marginalization. And finally, residents, people, they lose the confidence that they are full human beings. So they feel they have to depend on others to survive. And that's why it's very important to see, observe, as well as critically analyze as well as do experiment. Because we call ourselves a social enterprise. Social enterprise, if you go by the definition, it is socially responsible enterprise. Now, if such a big issue exists, poverty, which causes many other things. So in that case, it's very important that we try to find out what causes poverty. My observation was that lack of skill causes poverty. Now, what is a skill? Rather than these skills, I wanted to find out during the time study, work study, what skill do they have? And we saw traditional art and culture. These people who used to earn $7, $8 a month are now earning anything between 20,000 Indian rupees, which is about $30, $300 to many of the people have touched a lakh, that is 100,000. So imagine, and many of them have cars now. And most important, the villages are now the destinations to experience culture. Now, what it solves many elements. One of the most important elements, it actually brings the confidence amongst people that we can. First. Secondly, it safeguards the traditional art and culture. It transmits to the next generation, and they happily do it because we are in 2022. So digital awareness is very important. How to monetize it, how to ensure that benefit reaches them. So there are three elements in our Art for Life method. One is build capacity. Second, link them directly to the market. Directly is a very important word. And thirdly, do a lot of exchange collaboration. That brings pride to it. Because in art and artist case, most important is pride, recognition, as well as socio-economic benefit must go to them. You know, this year in event WTO of 27th, that World Tourism Day, they announced rethinking tourism. Actually, rethinking tourism means think that tourism must benefit the community. Community is in the nucleus of tourism because they shouldn't be just a bystander of tourism. So that's why these ICH-based tourism has a fantastic opportunity in creating that. If I give a few examples, Purulia, it's a tribal district located at the west of West Bengal. This Purulia, actually, it was known as, till 2011, it was known as a trouble zone. And left extremists used to be there, present there a lot. Now, sitting in 2022, it has the highest number of tourists, more than Darjeeling in West Bengal. Now, what changes? Culture. What do they have? Chow dance, which is a mass dance. How does global advocacy helps? In 2010, Chow got inscribed in the UNESCO Global Recognition List of ICH of Humanity. So look at it. One small recognition, if you can actually do it, market it well, in that case, Chow converts Purulia to a cultural destination. Is there any trouble, any conflict now? No, zero. Because any conflict can't survive without the support of community, without the support of local people. Here, local people got benefit. That's the most important part. There is a village called Charida. You know, post-COVID, I mean, during COVID, 2020, March, COVID hit India. 2020, I'll talk about December. Actually, November, we opened up all the villages. October end. December onwards, till date, barring 3-4 months in between when the second wave came, every day that Charida village, which makes Chow masks, they are recording a sale of 1.5 to 2 lakhs. A lakh means 100,000 in Indian rupees per day. Per day. So imagine how this has changed the scenario, even to overcome the post-COVID. Third important is the digital literacy, how it has helped. All the e-commerce companies have been linked to these villages, but that is for the people with handicraft. But the villages with art and culture, we have done Facebook Live, this, that, all possible. But again,
Hello, I think we are losing you, Amitava. Okay, so we got a couple of interesting questions from the audience. One is, Okay, accept that the culture has this strong power to uh, promote to find solution for the rural livelihood, the communal tensions, etc. How are we going to convince the donors? Because in spite of those great examples, we have not been always efficient in drawing enough attention from the donors on what we are doing. So, what do you think is a missing link, and where we can, how can we convince the donors? Then there's another question I think from Save Ludon. She's interested in how these local programs that are very locally tailored can be scaled to match other contexts in other places. Do you think your techniques, will be applicable in the areas other than where you are operating? Now, Arti, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I completely agree that it is a very big challenge to convince donors to support culture, to support any initiatives that are shaped by around culture. It's easier to, I mean, even that's not hard, but it's easier to convince a donor saying this is a series on health or this is a series on livelihood. And they cannot see the very tangible benefits of something as intangible as culture. Uh, so it's a very big challenge. I would just, before Amitav, because he has, I think, reconnected, I would definitely like to say that many of I think cultural say an initiative like ours is very replicable in any other cultural context, because I don't know of any communities anywhere in the world which are without culture, which are without music. Every community does. It doesn't matter how urban they are or how rural they are, or if they're living in the middle of a forest, they have music. So it's very replicable, but it is a very big challenge to convince donors to support it. Maybe we go back to Amitav to finish.
Yes,
Yeah,
Amitava, I think it's because you got disconnected. We've gone to the session, the questions and answers, but then I think one important insight we want to have from you is how would you convince the donors on the importance culture in development process? And related to this one question, other question is then how do you kind of, demonstrate the impact of your work? I mean, I know you have a lot of insights on this, right?
see, in the video, I have already shown the impact because as I mentioned, one is economy, one is there's empowerment on this, one is gender empowerment. These are impacts. SDGs 1, 4, 7, 11. These are very serious impacts. But most important, how do you convince the donor? See, worldwide, where UNESCO even is failing, is UNESCO is unable to produce evidence. It is very important. These are not activities, these are evidences. So, and I think it is also important that UNESCO also needs to study, because the UNESCO has done evaluation. Those evaluation reports are available. And these are global evaluation, independent evaluation. These are very important processes. And so these need to be tabled. Now, that is very important. And here, unless you present evidence, culture will still remain a low priority thing. Because how much UNESCO has spent, how much this, because see, here it is 3,200 people we started with, but now it is 70,000 people have alleviated out of poverty. It's a substantial number. And every year people are going, and this year, let's say Omex is a World Music Expo. It's the world's largest music platform, world music platform. Here, this year, a Baul musician got selected, and she will be performing along with the team on 21st October midnight at Lisbon. Now, these are very important areas. So we need to do a process, and product is available, and we need to try it out. At the same time, do the advocacy with the donors that this is not a cultural institution stuff. This is actually a development stuff, and evidences are here. So I think it's very important how you present.
Mhm. Yes, I agree, and this is why back in 2010 was it we start working together, right, in India, because the evidence you could show, the impact you could show was about the livelihood. It's not about culture being promoted. And so you use culture, but the impact the evidence you were able to show is the income, the access to the
If I take
electricity, etc.
nutshells in the bullet points, number one impact is in socio-economic improvement. Number two, marginalization inclusion. Thirdly, culture is a skill, it's proven. And fourth, it gets safeguarded transmission to the next generation. So average age of Baul was 52 years in 2004. Now it is 32. You know, these are very important evidences. And let the art and culture be promoted. That's fine. But unless the artists survive, art will not survive. Right. And in most of the cases, the top officer's problem, be it bureaucrat in the government or be it an UNESCO officer, barring few of the officers like you, but they do not go through the program. They just be at the inauguration and then they leave. And that's where the problem is.
Thank you very much. I keep all your criticism, yes, very carefully in my heart. Okay, one more last question to Arti and Amitava also. How replicable is your program, your methodology in other contexts?
It is replicable because see, it took almost about 7 to 10 years for us to build the methodology, and then Rajasthan, they adopted in 2019 September. Now they have 10 destinations, 1,500 people are in it, and they have added, even their campaign is one more extra night. Because see how it is benefiting the tourism industry. Because nobody goes to a place to see the hotel. To see the experience tourism, they need to stay in a hotel. So if we have to improve the tourism, we need to build the villages around them, strengthen the villages so that the visitor can actually experience the culture, visit the new places. And that's why UNWTO said, rethinking tourism. So these are it is a replicable model. Now, Maharashtra wants to replicate this, but their subset will be different. They want to do it within their resort areas, which is everywhere in 30 main resorts across rural Maharashtra. I think that's perfectly replicable, but the issue is replicable based on two things. One is you need dedicated people. That's very important. Our methodology is available. We can handhold, train, and then leave it to a group of people who will be interested in picking it up. And that's how we have been so this is a replicable not only within India, but also abroad. Because a team from Bhutan, a team from Kenya, and team from UK already visited. Interestingly, even from UK, because Highlands in Scotland, even they had the problem of a lot of aged people live there because there is a lot of people are leaving because there is not much of job there. So engagement of people is a very important outcome of this process.
Thanks. Arti?
As I mentioned, Moe, earlier, it's completely replicable because, for example, when we are talking about using music as a common thread, then any community you go to in any part of the world, they have music, and they have music which is centered or built around our own life cycle. Now, the life cycle, my life cycle of birth, death, marriage, childbirth, weddings, is the same as somebody who's living in Africa, Latin America, East Asia, anywhere. But just their music will be different. But the minute I hear a song in a different language, but I know that it is a song of separation or a song of longing, I identify with the emotion, right? So even when I'm listening to that song, if I say I listen to a song in Bengali and I don't understand the words, but if I know what it is about, I will connect with the emotion. Because I also know what that emotion is, and I have songs in my own language which are about that. So I think it's very replicable. People have to, if you're trying to replicate, you have to replicate the intention. You have to replicate what you're trying to do, you know?
Okay, thank you, Arti. Now I see Michael showing their face. I understand it's time. Now, sorry, the discussion is getting interesting, but I understand it's time for us to wind up. So yes, I hand over the mic to you.
Thank you, Moe. And yes, I'm sorry that it has reached that point because, as you said, the conversation is indeed getting interesting. So, with apologies, to those whose questions we haven't managed to reach, I would say thank you to all of our panelists. If you've enjoyed it, a recording of this will be available on the RSAA YouTube channel within the next 48 hours or so. So please look out for that. You can also find there recordings of all of the previous talks in this series, and there are now quite a lot of them, all addressing this rather productive but challenging area of how to get culture taken seriously as a development instrument. And the series has contributed a great deal to that. And this talk today has added more from new contexts. I'm very grateful to all of you who've taken an interest. We have in the next few weeks a reversion to the RSAA's normal series of lectures. On the 26th of October, Dr. Sanam Vakil will be talking about Iran, women's voices and the future of the Islamic Republic. In 2 weeks' time, quite a lot may have changed there, but I'm sure it will still be a very lively topic. And 2 weeks beyond, a week beyond that, on the 1st of November, Kishali Pinto Jayawardena from Sri Lanka will be talking about the recent political turbulence there and the role of freedom of information in building a democratic society. For now, I would simply like to thank Moe, Amitava, Arti, Benny, and Daniel Skillings for helping us to put this event on. The RSAA's role in this is really the simplest. We have provided a platform and we hope that we'll see you on it again soon. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.